rockheads, unplug the Xbox from your cerebral cortex and listen up. It's time for another stellar edition of .NET Rocks, the internet audio talk show for .NET developers with Chris Sells and Rory Blyth. This is Karen Cavallero here to announce show number 49 with guest Carl Franklin. Recorded January 13th, 2004 and published Monday, February 9th, 2004. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net, training developers to work smarter. And by Data Dynamics, makers of ActiveReports.net. Simple, powerful, and cost-effective reporting for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.datadynamics.com. Support is also provided by Code Magazine, Microsoft Technologies in-depth for IT managers and developers. Online at www.code-magazine.com. And now, the man whose blog has more exposure than Janet Jackson's right breast, Chris Sells. I call my friends to play internet games.
Thank you. This is Chris Sells, your host today on .NET Rocks. Today we're going to be talking about all kinds of interesting .NET things, but before we do, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Rory. And how do you pronounce your last name, Rory?
Blyth.
Because I always just read it, so I don't know.
You think Blyth?
I don't really. Sometimes Black. I think it's Black.
That's actually pretty typical.
And your website, you have a website named after an ice cream, yes? Neapolitan?
Neapolitan.com. It's like New Napoleon or New Olean.
And that's because of your hopes to take over the world?
It's actually because my French grandmother thinks that I'm like the reincarnation of Napoleon. It has to do with this whole like astrology psychic thing. She reads a lot of those newspapers. You get a 7-Eleven. Yeah.
Well, that's...
And nobody taking the domain name.
Well, that actually I find to be the key. I know a lot of people that spend a lot of time, and they can't name their companies because the domain name isn't available.
Yeah, it's always something really ridiculous. I saw like a towing company once. I don't remember what it was, but it had like a pink bunny on it. They had to design their whole logo, look, and feel around the domain name they had picked for their company. It was really ridiculous.
My favorite one is one I heard just today. It's a service where computer guys come to your house to like install software and set up your network and, fix those scary dialog boxes that come up on your computer. And they had named their company Geeks A Knockin'. So you go to geeksanokkin.com. That's like the local like geeks on call that we have around Portland. So that'll be good because I know you have trouble administering your computer network at times. Sometimes,
yeah, it's fairly difficult. Yeah.
Okay. So, and apparently we have, as our guest on our show today, we have Carl Franklin.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of Carl? Say hello, Carl.
Hey, how you guys doing?
All right. Hey, welcome to the show, Carl. It's really great to have you.
I really love what you're doing with the show. I listen to it all the time.
So, Carl, why don't you begin by saying what the heck is going on in this show?
Oh, is there something wrong? I think I'm living in a parallel universe.
Yes, this is Bizarro Land.
Bizarro Land, indeed.
This is the Star Trek show with the goatee.
It's a Jonathan Frakes marathon. Well, what's happening here is a lot of confused listeners out there.
Well, probably, and I thought that, we should give you the opportunity to calm them down in case they might think this would be a permanent change.
All right, I'll give a Microsoft-style response. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
So, there you go. So, all right, so I was out at Microsoft in Redmond, and where I learned to start every answer with the word so.
So, yes.
Yep, and I was... Actually, you were, Chris, helping me with a peer summit, a .NET peer summit that I had organized. A bunch of us nerd types who write and speak and teach and consult and write code got together to exchange some knowledge. And we're walking around, and you said, hey, I'd like to be back on the show or something. We were talking about it, and you said, what would be cool? Why don't I be the host and you be the guest? And I'll turn the tables, and it'll be my show, and you get to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And I hadn't thought of that before, so I thought about it for a few minutes.
It only seemed fair since, people certainly are fans of you, and yet on your own show, no one has ever interviewed you before.
That is very true.
So, I'd been on the show a couple of times, and I liked it. So I figured it was time that you got your share of the fame and glory, the riches that comes along with being on the .NET Rock Show.
I tell you, it's a bit intimidating.
Yeah?
It is. I never, took it from this side before. And, I guess it could be a bit intimidating.
Well, Rory and I will try to be as gentle as possible.
Oh,
but
thank
we're
you.
not generally known as very gentle, so. But we'll try. We'll totally try. So,
cool.
So you were talking about some summit where a bunch of, like-minded fellows get together to just talk about technology up in Redmond. That sounds pretty special. For the developers, that have, like, real jobs to do. I mean, what goes on at one of those events? Is it true that you guys, like, strip down to your bra and underwear and, like, have pillow fights? Or what really goes on in those kinds of places?
Those of us that were wearing underwear, stripped down to our bras. And what happened was I just sent out some email to people in my inbox, and apparently, when you do that and you don't include certain people, they kind of get mad at you. So I think I made a few people mad at me, but I just went through my inbox and I said, yeah, he's a developer, she's a developer, he's a developer, she's a developer. And I just concocted a message and I said, hey, why don't we all get together somewhere? And I had no idea where at the time. So, where we could sit around a table with no pressure and no performing and, simply have discussions about what we know, come to the table, not ready to make a presentation, but ready with some code and some samples and to teach each other the things that we have, been specializing in. Everybody has an area of expertise and specialty. Excuse me. And to my surprise, I thought I would get blown off, but to my surprise, everyone was really, really excited about the idea. And I think at first there was like 20 or so people. And it's true that after about 20 or 25, I sort of stopped looking through my inbox and said, yeah, that's probably enough. We won't have enough time for anybody to do anything, of any substance or to give everybody a fair share. Probably the quality will go down the more people that we have.
So how did it go? I mean, how did you think it went? Because I remember, I volunteered. I was new at Microsoft then. I'm still new at Microsoft.
Right.
And I said, gosh, that sounds like a really good idea. I bet we could,
right.
have you guys into the place.
And you actually got the thing happening at Microsoft, and you went to your boss, Sean Morrissey, and said, hey, I guess you did, and said, is this something we can do for Carl and the gang? And Sean said, yeah, of course. And, if we could, benefit in any way from this, little gathering, then we will. And
did we? Did we end up benefiting in any way?
I think you may end up benefiting from it if we ever get the notes transcribed and stuff like that. But I guess you guys were going to bring in a video camera at the end of the day and do some interviews. That never happened.
We were going to, and then you guys freaked out because you wanted to just, you didn't want the pillow fight on film is, I think, what happened.
Actually, that's not how I remember it. I remember a few people saying that they didn't want videotaping during the summit, but it was okay afterward.
Yeah, see, now we'll know for next time.
Yeah.
Well, now for next time.
But as it turned out, I had my Cool Edit Pro running, unbeknownst to anyone, and not to get a .NET Rock show out of it, although in retrospect, it probably could have been edited down to some good stuff if we had good mics and all that. But just to transcribe, to have somebody go through and make a transcription of it and pick out the good parts, and it actually be worth reading, I think.
Is that something your audience can look forward to on your new blog?
I don't know. It all depends on who's going to transcribe it. I have the files, and it's a matter of getting it transcribed.
I'd actually love to hear that or read it. Actually, I should say you don't really listen to transcription so much, but
right.
I remember you called me while this thing was going on, and I heard all the splashing party noises in the background. And I think I was standing there on a Saturday afternoon with my half-frozen burrito on the plate.
Right.
Getting ready to watch a rerun of The Cosby Show. And I felt kind of a little bit left out. So if I could, read about that, that'd be great, actually.
You could potentially listen to it while you typed it out for the rest of the world.
And that's what it comes down to. It's who's going to, commit to doing this? And so.
Yet we're all fundamentally lazy. That's what makes us good developers. So what kind of stuff did you talk about at the summit? Do you remember?
There was probably about 7 or 8 of us, and I remember particularly Bill Vaughn and Fernando Guerrero talking about database stuff, and there's definitely a mutual admiration society going on there between those two guys. And there was some stuff from Fernando I definitely wanted to know, and just listening to those guys talk and having everybody engaged in the conversation was just mind-blowingly fascinating. Also, Chris Kinsman, who is going to be a guest on an upcoming show, he has a lot of experience with a lot of stuff. I mean, he's the guy who built DevX.com, Yeah,
so Chris Kinsman really knows his stuff.
He does, and he knows from experience, and not just book smart. But
he's not like one of us, right? He actually goes out and does it in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, that's exactly what I meant to say. Thank you for putting words in my mouth.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I was very impressed with, not only his knowledge of, from experience and all this, but his total recall of it and the details that he is able to, he keeps all the important stuff right there on the tip of his brain. So he was able to show us some really, really cool stuff. We got into a discussion about group development and how difficult it is, and how not only are there not a lot of tools to do it, in a good way, but some of the, some of the features that are baked into the software we do use are prohibitive to, doing a lot of things.
Actually, it's interesting you bring up the group development thing. I had coffee with Ward Cunningham this morning.
No kidding.
Yeah, he's an employee at Microsoft now.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So Ward Cunningham, for folks that don't know, has a ton of experience in this industry. And one of the things that he is known for is he really helped in the initial patterns movement. It was kind of he and Kent Beck sitting around in the research area at... There's another high-tech company. It's not Intel. It's Tektronix. Thank you. In Tektronix. And they kind of started that whole, patterns thing, and then later the extreme programming and the group programming thing. And boy, we had a fabulous talk. And then, of course, in the sidelines, he also invented the wiki. So
right, which I still don't know what the wiki is. What's the wiki?
A wiki is just a bunch of people all editing the same set of web pages through the browser.
Ah.
And they all just trust each other. So, Rory and I would not be good participants in a wiki. Because, you never quite know.
I wouldn't let Chris write anything.
Yeah, So that's Ward. He would be a good guy to have. But, so, the whole group programming thing, I mean, did that come up? Did you guys have any experience there? Because I know that's really hot right now, that people are thinking about extreme programming and pair programming and test-based programming.
Well, it's interesting because I think of extreme programming as being most effective in small groups, as Sam Gentili pointed out on his show. But we were really talking about when you have large-scale, complex applications, when you're working with large groups of people and you have some people working on these components and others on those, and collaboration and version control and all of those kinds of things.
So the whole team programming, large-scale team-based programming.
Yeah, and as I was sitting there, my little, communication socket brain went into action and said, wouldn't it be cool if I had some sort of thing in the development environment where, as I'm making a change to an assembly that I know other people are depending on, it would shoot out an instant message or some kind of notification right in the environment to that developer and say, hey, this is being changed right now. I hope this is okay with you, or something like that. So big problems being that we have, developers working on things that affect other developers, and trying to keep all that stuff in sync is often a manual process.
That's a really good idea. That's probably even something that somebody could build now that Microsoft's provided the vSIP stuff,
right,
to just anyone. That would be a really cool add-in to be able to hook in, using some metadata to say, gosh, these people care about this assembly, and firing off notifications. And of course, RSS would be a fabulous way to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be necessarily something you want to land in your inbox along with all the other spam and porn notifications that you get. And that was for you, Rory.
It wouldn't be as important as the spam and the porn, but
that was for Rory, actually.
Yeah, I heard, registered, definitely. I mean, I agree. Porn is up there, far be it for me to derail this entire interview just to talk about porn, which I would have done, and you opened the door, so this is on your head. I'll stop now. Please continue, everybody.
It's just an interesting reputation, that one gets when one says the P word repeatedly in blog posts.
Well, sure.
Especially when you use WinFS in the same sentence.
I'll tell you, I'm not sure the WinFS team appreciated that post as much as the rest of us did, though.
I was young and stupid and needed the money, I mean, these things.
So anyway, I have no idea. What were we talking about?
Groupware.
What's that?
Group development.
Oh, that's right. Large-scale, team-based programming.
Yes.
And I know Chris has done a bunch of that.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned is that in a C# project, the project actually has events, pre-build and post-build events. And he was doing some really cool stuff, sending off processes to, and I can't even remember what he was doing, but he was utilizing that. And of course, me being a VB programmer, I had no knowledge of that. And I said, what is that? So I thought it was very cool, and I would like to have those events as well.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's really cool.
Great idea.
You could walk up and subscribe to some assembly in process.
Yeah.
And you could say, gosh, let me know if this changes because I care.
Right.
Yeah, I like that idea. That's really cool.
And of course, Robert Green's talking about his new job is sort of working on the community aspect of Visual Studio.net development. And I thought to myself, well, what does that mean? Community inside the Visual Studio environment, and not just like go to a website, but sort of real involvement there. And so, my mind is awash with messaging and notifications and, keeping track of stuff. And I just don't have the time to put into developing these things, although nothing would please me more than for every responsibility to just go away and I could move to a cabin in Vermont with a little wood stove and hammer out code. Of course, I'd have wood stove and electricity in a T1, but,
Yeah, that's the thing I always talk to my wife about. I definitely want to move away to a cabin in the woods where there's no phone and just, fireplace, except for, of course, I need a T1.
Right. It's sort of the Ted Kaczynski movement of developers, I think.
Code everything in Klingon, right? He kept his diaries in Klingon. I don't know if everybody knows this.
No, maybe you could tell our listeners who Ted Kaczynski was.
The Unabomber.
Oh, right, yes,
right.
Thank you.
Not that I have a whole bunch of esoteric Unabomber knowledge,
No, that wouldn't be something you'd be interested in. No, not you, Rory, no. So, Carl...
didn't you interview the Unabomber once, or was that Stephen Hawking?
No comment. Let's move along here.
Okay.
I'm not supposed to talk about this.
All right.
Lip sync ships,
So, Carl, you were telling me, we talked about the summit, but how do you happen to have all these interesting people in your inbox? What do you do for a living besides, record the .NET show, which I'm sure has you awash in more money than you can spend?
Ever since I really started in this business was with Crescent Software. Back, they were the number 2 company to have a VBX on the market.
And what was their VBX?
The first was MicroHelp. They actually had a library called QuickPack Professional. And without going down that path, which I will come back to, by the way, it had all sorts of VBXs in it. Once I started down that road, I started writing for Basic Pro Magazine, which was the first incarnation, which is now Visual Studio Magazine. It went from Basic Pro Magazine to Visual Basic Programmer's Journal, from that to Visual Studio Magazine. And Ethan Weiner, the president of Crescent Software, was sort of like the only content in the early days of Basic Pro Magazine. He wrote a lot of the columns. He got a lot of the technical stuff together. He wrote the Q&A column. When Visual Basic came out, he decided he didn't want to learn Windows programming, and he had done his stuff, and he just wanted to, get out of the business. So he basically handed the Q&A column over to me, and I was, at that point, had done some VBits and done some writing. So I sort of got in the business, and like in any business, when you get into it, you have peers. Dan Appleman, for example, was a good friend of mine back then. You go to VBits and you hang out in the speaker's lounge and you get to know a lot of these people. And I just happened to have come into it right at the beginning. So a lot of people know me and I know a lot of people. And I got out of...
So when did you start at Crescent?
So I started at Crescent in 1992, I think. Or 91. Might have been 91.
Okay. And had you been a developer before then, or where did you do before that?
Before that, I had No, I was not a professional developer. I had Quick Basic, and I was absolutely fascinated with Quick Basic. Before that, I learned on TRS-80 Basic.
Sure.
I had a TRS-80 Model 4, commonly known as the Trash 80.
The Trash 80.
Model 4?
Model 4, yes. I was an advanced TRS-80 user. Most people had...
That's one better than what I was usually around when I was a kid. You know, it's like the TRS-80 Model 3.
And that was the most popular one, is the Model 3.
Yeah.
But Carl had the Model 4.
Yeah, Mr. Fancy TRS-80.
My father had it. So, anyway, that's what I learned to program on in BASIC. And I also learned a lot about TRS-DOS and how to use the two together. So, I spent many nights just with matted hair, not bathing, in my room, pouring through the manuals, trying to, link devices together with batch language. And
how old were you when you were doing this with the matted hair?
16, 17, I guess.
Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah.
Actually, I became very famous among my hacker friends. Actually, I didn't know I had hacker friends, but apparently I did. Some of my friends, who were, into, the teenage hacking thing, and found a local phone number that you could call and get some sort of tone and put in a 5-digit code and then an area code and number, and if that code was good. I mean, it was totally insecure and wide open. And so they would sit around and hack out codes for free long distance and stuff just by
freaking.
They did.
Yeah,
but it was manual. It was manual freaking.
Sure.
I had always wanted to write a bulletin board system because I thought that was the bee's knees.
Sure.
And there was nothing out there that wasn't, $300 for TBBS was a lot, and I couldn't afford that. And there was nothing else for the TRS-80. So,
but you did have hours and hours of free time in the
hours.
evenings and weekends when you weren't out dating chicks.
Hours of free time.
Crimes.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did was I wrote a program to pick random numbers and to, call a CompuServe number somewhere. And
dude, you wrote a daemon dialer.
I wrote a daemon dialer, yeah.
Oh, man.
And before I know it, I had 16, snot-nosed, nerdy kids on my doorstep knocking on my door. Is Carl home? And my parents coming into my room, and here are all these kids, and they want to see my code, And I wasn't a hacker. I was just a kid who liked communications and modems, and I wanted to build a bulletin board. That's what I wanted to do. So that sort of goal to build a bulletin board drove me to Quick Basic. And then I got PDQ-COM, which was an assembly language library for serial communications. Crescent Software did. Dave Cleary.
I've heard of PDQ-COM, totally.
Yep, Dave Cleary wrote that. And then I got into PDQ, which was if you listen to the Ethan Weiner show, he talks all about that. It's a replacement library for Quick Basic. So when you link with it, it stubs out a whole bunch of stuff you don't need, and you create these really small, fast programs. So I was in heaven with Crescent Software. These guys clearly enjoyed what they did. They were totally into it. They knew they were cool, and they promoted themselves that way, and I just ate it up. So I called them up looking for a summer job, and I had just got Visual Basic and was playing around with that, and bing, bam, boom, got hired, and that started my career.
So you've been a basic guy for forever.
Yeah, and at Crescent, they weren't C programmers. They were assembly programmers. So I actually learned assembly before I learned C. So they had a nice mix of basic and assembler.
Well, C is just portable assembly anyway.
Yeah, and I learned that. I learned, and I've done some C and some C++.
Which is why you don't do it anymore, probably.
Yeah, it just never seemed natural to me. But of course, that's what everybody programmed in.
No, I was a Quick Basic guy too.
Ooh, didn't know that.
I loved Quick Basic. So
it was very cool.
I was there.
Well, it's funny too. We're all coming out here, but I spent 3 years as a full-time AppleSoft basic programmer on my Apple II.
Ooh.
That's just nerdy.
But I mean, that's how I started. I mean, I went to high school during the days, but I was a full-time programmer.
Wow.
Chris Sells, AppleSoft consultant. You got that book on the shelf?
No, not yet.
That's awesome. Wow. This has been such a revealing night. Chris Sells. Okay, please, go.
So we all started doing basic.
I was going to say I really enjoyed the magic of programming in Quick Basic, but I also knew that, I was missing out on a lot of the technical stuff that I really had a desire to know. So I got a job. I had a job actually before I went to Crescent. I worked for Voyetra Technologies in Pelham, New York, and they made a DOS MIDI sequencer. And I was in tech support. So what I would do is I would hang out at the bar after hours with the programmers, and I just have these burning questions, like, what the hell is a stack? What the hell? When has a quick basic programmer ever used the word stack? You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I had no idea what these things were, so I learned computer science over a beer,
Sure.
And was fascinated, and I just had to know more and know more and know more. When I got to Crescent, I started writing in assembler and sort of deconstructed my knowledge from the bottom up. And so I have this side of me that really loves the nerdy sort of systems level component, server type kind of programming, as fast and as tight and as efficient as possible and all that stuff. But at the same time, I have, a bent for programming applications and in a higher level language, which I, enjoy also.
So are you still... So Rory and I we gave up our line numbers and we went over to, the C style, semicolons.
Right.
And yet you're still, even with all that assembly language, you're still in Visual Basic. And,
yeah.
And I don't sense any bitterness. I sense very much that you love it.
I love it.
And there's nothing wrong with that, Carl.
Yeah, that's true. And for the record, Chris, I don't have anything at all against C#, its cousins, its parents, and the horse it rode in on. I love C#, and I love the programmers that program in C#.
Aww.
Yeah,
and I
it's
think
kind of a
that
warm, fuzzy feeling all around, and that's convenient because we rock you, all right, with our C#. If it were any other
in your
way.
Dreams, pal.
Which it's not. We're all just happy.
Well, anyway,
I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, there's way more Visual Basic programmers than C#
There is.
or C programmers of any kind.
There is.
So if VB programmers ever decided that they had had enough of us for any reason, it'd be like Alfred Hitchcock's Birds, right? With C programmers crammed into phone booths and Visual Basic programmers just coming at us with their beaks.
Right. The thing is about Visual Basic is it's more about the programmer than it is about the language. And what I mean by that is, since, if you think about the big expansion of technology and programmers that happened in the 90s and the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of that was fueled by Visual Basic and became the most popular language and stuff. And really because it was like the second gold rush, or maybe it was the third gold rush. It was a race to get your programs done so that you could make shitloads of money. And they didn't really care how things were done. They just wanted them done.
My understanding is that a few years ago, Visual Basic passed COBOL in terms of number of lines written. So it's the number one most lines of code ever.
Right, and COBOL was probably representative of the first gold rush, or the second gold rush after the actual gold rush, but you know what I'm saying.
Right. With the actual gold rush, that's 0.
Yeah, so the Visual Basic...
Gold Rush 2, the Revenge, right. Yeah.
So obviously programming is a thing that requires some serious study in order to do very well. It requires a sense of dedication. It requires a little bit of masochism. It requires trying to force square pegs into round holes where they don't fit in your psyche until you really and truly understand, and the light goes on, and then, you feel one with the machine. But that doesn't happen very easily, and I bet you that it probably will happen if you're just starting out in programming. It'll probably happen faster with C#. But, so what I try to do is I try to talk to the people that are already Visual Basic programmers, that already have a framework of programming, and then I try to help them understand, at a richer level what they can do with the language, because the language itself there's nothing limiting about VisualBasic.net.
Well, certainly VisualBasic.net. I'm hard pressed to come up with anything at all interesting that you can't do in VisualBasic.net. It's not like Visual Basic in the old days where you really did have some real limitations at the language level.
Yes, you did.
I am from the semicolon enabled family of languages, but I could as easily program VisualBasic.net in terms of just raw capability. There's
Right.
nothing there I can't do that I want to do.
Right, and there's other things too that I like about it over C# in terms of the programming experience, which is, you know, the background compiling. As soon as I move off of a line of code, it's compiled and checked for me, and I get squiggles and help messages that mean something. You know, like cannot override property such and such foo, because in the base class it is not declared overridable. You know, that's a message that I can deal with, not object error, you know, error 4927. Look it up and blow me. You know what I'm saying? And that's the kind of error handling that Visual Basic programmers are used to. So when they're in my class, one of the very first things I tell them is, look, you're going to get bugs. You're going to get errors. Don't just hit the OK button and stare at the ceiling. You know, look at the error message that you get, because believe it or not, it's going to tell you exactly what's wrong. And, you know, that takes a little bit of rewiring for most people to get out of that habit.
So you still, I mean, even with that heavy duty communications and you know, the assembly language training, you still really do prefer Visual Basic.
Absolutely. Hi, this is Chris Sells, a.k.a. Carl Franklin, here to tell you about Active Reports for .NET. So, if you've got a report writer and you're not satisfied with it, or you're still looking for reporting solutions, you got to check out ActiveReports.net. And I'm not just reading copy here to you folks. I'm talking from experience. I also happen to know that many of the regional directors and MVPs swear by ActiveReports.net. People who come into my class, my VB.NET Masterclass, when I ask, what are you using for reporting, more hands go up for ActiveReports.net than any other reporting engine. So don't take my word for it. See for yourself. Go to www.datadynamics.com and look for ActiveReports.net. It really does rock. And you can download an evaluation version and get a report up and running really, really quickly. They've got a great walkthrough. And, you don't have to configure up lots of crazy report servers. It's not a replacement for Crystal Enterprise. It's not that kind of thing. It's much, much more simple, much more clean. You get PDF, you get HTML, you get it all. So check it out. Go to datadynamics.com now. All right, let's get back to this interview with Carl Franklin. He's doing pretty good for a first-time guest, don't you think? All right, keep rocking. Stick around.
What do you do now with your time?
Okay, well, I do lots of training, obviously, and I have a family. I have a very small daughter. I have two daughters. One's 8 and one's almost 2, so, they take up a lot of time, and it's time well spent, as you know. So
you do the training thing. Tell me a little bit
So I do the training thing. In my spare time, I do research programming, and this is the kind of programming I like. I learn about something that I can do, I research it, I go to the help file, I write some code, I figure out a test harness, and I understand it, and I figure out, how can that help me? Either how can I apply that to something I'm teaching, or can I apply that to something I've written in the past, or whatever. So I sort of think of it as research programming. There are a couple of projects ongoing that I have, going all the time. One of them is a sort of a sockets framework with a very flexible and simple protocol for transferring binary data. And that touches a lot of areas. That touches sockets, number one, but it also touches multi-threaded issues and synchronization. And it also touches, on protocols and dealing with all that stuff. So I kind of like that.
So you're back to the low-level communication stuff.
Yeah, I like that.
And you're
stuff.
building a bulletin board?
Yeah. I had actually thought of building a web-based bulletin board, with a scrolling black screen with, green ANSI colors and stuff.
ANSI art. Right?
ANSI stuff, But, I mentioned that to somebody. Wouldn't that be cool? And they looked at me like I was from another planet. That would not be cool.
No, not
that
cool.
That would really suck. We've come so far.
So I still have to wonder, in this day and age of, text-based internet protocols and XML and, SOAP and the whole bit, why you would build, a low-level socket-based binary framework?
I'm an incurable control freak. No, that's not the reason. I actually am to some point, but the real reason is there are lots of situations out there where web services, remoting, XML, some of the higher level things, HTTP, aren't an option. And most of it's about 1% of the people doing communications fall into this category. But for example, I just came back from Burlington, Vermont, where I was consulting for a company up there that does light controls, and they make control boxes, the circuit boards and everything with embedded Zilog chips and software put in there that talks. They actually wrote their own network protocol at first because they're writing the hardware, and they wanted to move to TCP/IP for obvious reasons. And they looked first at remoting, but they have devices on their network that have to be using Windows CE and the Compact framework. The Compact framework doesn't support remoting. They would have used web services had they not had devices where they were, writing things with limited memory and limited resources and limited CPU power and all that kind of stuff. So web services weren't an option for them. So sockets was the only way to go.
So you had the Compact framework on one end,
yep,
as the controller, and then this little Zilog chip on the other.
Yeah, well, they have basically a whole bunch of different things. They have this device that acts as both a client and a server, and then they have a Compact framework, device that acts as both a client and a server, and then they have a PC, like a Windows application, Windows Forms application that has to do all that stuff. So anybody can connect to anybody else, pretty much, and it's all controlled by a protocol that they write. But the cool thing was that, the code that I wrote for them, wrote it as a DLL, and moving it over, we said, okay, now what do we do? I said, well, you have a Windows CE device handy. Yeah. So let's try it. So I pulled up Visual Studio in a new project, a Compact Framework Smart Device Application, DLL, just loaded my VB file in and compiled it, and without a hitch, it just compiled. And I thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
That, everything that we had done was supported by the Compact framework, so that it just compiled, and we copied it over to the machine and ran it, and it ran. And then we tried to connect, and it connected, and the protocol worked, and everything worked. It was just probably the smoothest, magical experience I've had with going from one platform to another.
So even though the web services stuff wasn't baked in, certainly the socket stuff was.
Well, the remoting stuff wasn't baked in. That was their first choice.
Sure.
Yeah. And the web services weren't an option because of the little devices that some guy had to write, the stuff in C in about 4K of memory or something. I don't know.
You could easily, get in C and XML parser and, all that. The problem is getting it at that size.
But if you think about the problems that web services solves, right? A lot of it is the firewall issue, okay? And the data is bloated. It's bloated out to take advantage of, the features that have to work across all these different platforms. But when you've got a closed network and you have control over ports aren't an issue, firewalls are not an issue, and you got a closed network, you don't have security issues. You can just hard code an IP address in a device. Sockets is the simplest solution.
Yeah, oh totally.
If you've got the tools.
Yeah, the only problem then is, everyone agreeing, all these different devices agreeing on the binary format itself.
Right.
And
that's
can't
why
take
it's
your .NET code and load it on the Zilog box.
Right. And that's why it's drop dead simple in, the protocol is, and it's simply the only thing that's different about sockets with sending, data to files and other stuff is that it's just raw data. If I take 100 bytes or 1,000 bytes and I send it down the stack, at the other side, it's going to get a callback when, some amount of data has been received. It could be 1,000 bytes, but it could be 100 bytes. It could be 200 bytes. And so you don't really know when the end of that data is. It's just raw data. So that's why you have these different protocols on top. Like even HTTP has a header that says, here's the content length.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It has 2 carriage returns, line feeds that say this is the end of the header. And then the content length says this is how much data I'm about to send you. And so content length is really the minimum requirement for any sockets protocol. So all we did is we just I won't say appended, but we prepended, if that's a word. We put...
Yep, prepended. That's the right word.
Is that the right word?
It is the right word.
We prepended the data with 4 bytes, which I used the bit converter class to serialize, for lack of a better word, that an integer containing the length of the data we were going to send. And we chopped it up into blocks. The size of those blocks can be set statically. Or, in a future release, maybe it will dynamically expand based on the buffer overruns or anything like that. But on the other side, then, we have a state class that we use with the asynchronous method, and we pass it around from thread to thread. And that contains, how much data was received and how much we have to go, and have we received it all yet? And just a very simple length-based, a length measuring protocol.
Well, you're describing most of the early, binary-based internet protocols.
Right. And so, again, I want to say that it's a matter of appropriateness. You would not use this to send an order to a web server from another web server. That'd just be stupid.
Right.
Well,
so it's interesting. I mean, RPC is essentially that.
Right.
I mean, with a bunch of different data types in, but, length prefixed. So you implemented RPC. Well done.
Thank you. It works great, too, in a multi-threaded way, and works on
I bet it didn't take very long to get working on the .NET side either, did it?
Yeah, no, it was much easier to program in .NET than in anything else that I've ever tried it in. I mean, first of all, I've written 2 books on sockets programming, one for VB4 and one for VB6, and both of those, worked within the single-threaded environment of Visual Basic. Even the server had only one thread at a time, one listener and then one thread, and it processed the thing and it went back, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, when I heard that Visual Basic.NET had multi-threading, of course that's the first thing I thought of. I've always been, ever since I saw VB.NET and I saw that I could do this sockets framework, I wanted to perfect. So I've been working on that ever since.
So that's interesting. I know there was some controversy in the early .NET community about whether putting all of those features into Visual Basic.NET would be a good thing or a scary thing. And what do you think?
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I mean, look, if just because you're Mort doesn't mean that it shouldn't be in there. You know what I mean? You don't have to use every feature of Visual Basic to be a Visual Basic.NET programmer.
Well, maybe you could tell the listeners who Mort is.
Yeah, and this is something I learned recently. And I learned it at the .NET Peer Summit, as a matter of fact, in December. We're sitting around and somebody mentioned Mort. And I said, what's that? Who's Mort? Like they were talking about a real guy. But Mort wouldn't like that.
Sure.
You could do it that way, but is Mort going to understand this? And I said, who's Mort? So Mort is the sort of, what would you call him? The quintessential average VB programmer.
No, not just VB programmer. I mean, but the guy that that has to write code. It's not the guy who like wants to write code or loves to write code, but this is the guy.
The 9-to-5 programmer.
Yeah, the guy who, wants to do his job and get it done and do a good job, but then go home.
He wants to go home.
Right. Unlike the rest of us who won't leave, right?
That's good. I thought you guys were saying Mork the whole time, too. Like
Mork.
Like Nanu.
From the planet Orc.
So I learned something today. That's good.
Oh, man.
All right, so you have built your own RPC infrastructure. That's cool. And you said you had a couple of ongoing projects. Is this one of your ongoing projects?
Well, this is sort of a core piece of other ongoing projects. Although the ongoing projects I'm doing in other pieces are not using the RPC piece, all of them, but some of them are. One of them that I've been doing for a while is a mastermind game that you can play over the internet. Because my daughter Emmy, she's 8, as I said, I taught her to play Mastermind last fall, and she's become quite good at it. And she's learned the the little tricks and the little process of elimination steps and strategies that you can go through to figure out the code in 5 or 6 moves. So we love to play all the time, and when I'm traveling and stuff. When I call home before they go to bed, we just say, hi, how you doing, and miss you, and all that, and good night. And I thought it'd be cool if, she could go to the computer, fire up Mastermind, and we could play a game. I could play from my hotel room before she goes to bed. So first thing I did was I looked on the internet, didn't find anything. And,
there's got to be one, isn't there one?
There's probably one, but I don't know if it works over the internet. I saw one like done in Java that you could play against the machine or something like that. But
you could just tell her it's you.
Couldn't, yeah. Oh, God, it's terrible.
It's just that you're really, really good.
She'd be mad at me. Honey, why are you mad at me? Because you didn't answer me last night. So that's going. That's going well.
You're also doing some MIDI stuff, aren't you?
MIDI, yeah. MIDI's another thing because, I cut my teeth at Voyager Technologies, which was a MIDI sequencing company. MIDI sequencers in DOS for musicians. Not a good combination.
Well,
DOS and guitar player do not go together in the same sentence.
Well, frankly, DOS and any normal human, although not guitar players aren't necessarily normal human. But. Especially
back then when IRQ conflicts were not just something that happened once in a while. Everybody dealt with them. I mean, we had... a typical tech support call was, it's locking up. Oh, do you have a Video 7 video card? Oh, yes. Well, what you have to do is put a shunt over the jumper J5, which will redirect the horizontal retrace, disable the horizontal retrace, which is causing a problem with... Thank God for Microsoft. That's all I got to say. With hardware abstraction layers and shit like that, I don't want to deal with that, and nobody does. We wouldn't have... an IT economy if it weren't for Windows.
Well, but, you say that, but of course Microsoft invented DOS, too.
All right, but no, They didn't invent DOS, they bought it.
Well, okay. I'm sorry, they marketed it to the masses. How about that?
They invented Windows.
Agreed.
And they did the work to abstract hardware away from us. And that, my friends, is worth its weight in gold.
Oh, no, I'm a huge fan, believe me. In fact, I even love .NET more because it even abstracts more of the machine away from you. So
now I can just say, Mort equals whatever. So we were talking about Mort. No, we were talking about MIDI. I'm sorry. So I had some MIDI code that I had done in VB6, and it wasn't that interesting, but I moved it over to .NET, and it became very interesting. Now, granted, I'm using the pinvoke technology to do API calls, but
that's the way you get to MIDI in .NET.
Yeah, that's how you get to MIDI in .NET. So I wrote this little high-level tool that I can say, play and pass a note number and a duration. I can turn the volume up and down, and I can select patches, and I put in a general MIDI instrument list and all this stuff. But the coolest part is hooking the MIDI receive and being able to change the bits. And believe it or not, I do, bit masking and ORing and ANDing and all that, shifting and all that stuff. And, having to change bits to reroute the MIDI bytes to another device. So basically I have this router where I can say, here's my input device, here's my output device, my output channel, my volume or whatever, and then I process this callback that just simply routes the data from one input to another. And I actually did it for a reason. See, I have a band, and my brother plays keys. Brother's a Java programmer, by the way.
Oh no, do you guys fight over it at Thanksgiving or something?
Oh, hell no. Hell no. We're always comparing notes. I mean, we're like, oh yeah, Java's got something that does that. It's X. And I say, oh, really cool. Yeah, we got this and that. And yeah, they have a soap serializing library that they bought. It's like a third-party guy. I don't know. I don't want to get into that. Anyway. So I have a touch screen next to his keyboard computer, on his keyboard computer, and I wrote a program where he could just, make patches. I want my top controller to play the organ, press the patch, and it plays the organ. But not just the organ. I have software synths like the B4, which is a B3 organ that's a virtual synthesizer. So the math behind the electronics in the Hammond B3 have been simulated in code, right? And so when you play through this software synthesizer, it sounds like a Hammond B3 organ. You put that next to a Jimmy Smith record, you won't be able to tell the difference. It's unbelievable.
So you don't need Jimmy Smith anymore. You replace Jimmy Smith.
Jimmy Smith
with Visual Basic.
Yeah, but the problem is that you can't switch a controller from one of these software synths to another very easily. Not only that, but we wanted patches I wanted to, transpose this piano up and, remove the aftertouch and I want to split the keyboard at this point and make it play a bass on the left hand and this particular electric piano. So you can set up these patches, much like you can do in the environment area of a program called Logic by eMagic, which I fell in love with, but now they are Mac only. And so that's what he has. He's got this setup where he can just take it out on a gig, and I want horn samples from Gigasampler. Boink, hit the button. Now he's got horns. Oh, I want this setup or that setup. So that's what we're doing with MIDI.
And it's funny too. I mean, with all of it seems like every computer scientist in the world is also a musician of some kind. I mean, I played in the marching band. You're clearly in the band. What do you play in the band?
I play guitar.
Guitar. Rory, you must have some musical talent of some kind.
I scream.
No, you play. Come on.
Okay, I play music.
There we go. See, there's all of us. Don Box and Mike Abercrombie, who started Developmentor, they met in a marching band. And they both played instruments. And
yep.
I mean, that's just everyone.
Mike Amundsen plays.
Yeah, there's just a long list. I don't know what
long list.
But they're all musicians.
So everybody asks me, what's the deal with musicians and programmers? And I've heard a lot of explanations. The most obvious connection is music is very mathematical, but I don't think that's it. Because I don't like programming for the math.
Well, yeah. In fact, I hardly ever do math. I write the programs to do the math, and I don't do it.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. I mean, programming is extremely abstract. I mean, you're never really dealing with anything real, especially not anymore. You got the virtual machine that's running into the virtual machine that's running into the virtual machine. I mean, everything is super, super, super abstract, and music is the most abstract art form in existence. I think there's probably just some right-brained, sort of thing going on there. That's just my guess.
Unless you're singing "Row, row, row your boat," but here's the best description I've ever heard, or the best explanation is that in order to play an instrument, you have to work very hard on a lot of fundamental technical things that are difficult. It's like the square pegs and round hole things. And you have to get that technique down so that you understand the mechanics and the theory behind the music. So when you're practicing, you're doing it very slowly and you're deconstructing the music. It's not really music when you're practicing scales, You're working on the technical aspect of it. So you have to nail the technique, and that requires an abstraction, as Rory said, and a slowing down of the process and a thinking through. But you also have to zoom out and see the big picture, which is the performance. Is this going to sound good? You know what I mean? And when you're writing an application, you're doing the same thing. You zoom in on these little minute details that sometimes you have to work out in long extended ways. And then you zoom out again mentally and you see how it fits into the big picture. And so programmers, the best programmers, have laser zoom in and out capabilities. Like you can zoom in on a problem, focus on that problem, nail it, zoom back out, and then you see the big picture again.
And see how it fits in the big picture.
Right, and that's what makes a good programmer a good programmer. It's also what makes a good guitar player a good guitar player.
Yeah,
because,
except for so you let me blow a hole in your theory. My trumpet playing sucks.
Well, that's because you do your zooming with the keyboard and the mouse, not with the
no practicing,
not with the trumpet. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
So you did not blow a hole in my theories, man.
Oh, okay. You're right. I'm sorry. So switching gears, you and I have a common ancestry besides our initial love of BASIC. You and I both spent a lot of years in the training industry. How long have you been doing the training thing?
The first class I ever taught was at Crescent Software. It was a class in Visual Basic, which was probably 2.0 then, and followed by another class in QuickPack Professional, which was our toolkit. Our toolkit, you asked me what it was before, the first one out. It started as an assembly library for Quick Basic and turned into, assembler routine, stuff like sorting arrays and that kind of thing. Lots of different low-level assembler kind of gearhead things. Writing to a sector, reading a sector.
Wow.
Yeah. Determining if the printer was available. That kind of stuff. Nice little things. There was one cool thing I remember, string to bind and bind to string. It took a byte or a long or whatever, and it converted it to a string of zeros and ones that represented the bytes.
Wow.
Little things like that. So anyway, hundreds of routines in assembler. And then when Visual Basic came out, they wrote OCX or VBXs in assembler. Jay Monroe, I'll never forget this. Jay Monroe, who went on to PC Magazine, he wrote an article in PC Mag about it. You could probably still find it in the archives. He wrote a custom control that was pretty I can't remember if it was a slider control or something like that in assembly language. And so they wrote
like writing COM code in C.
Yeah. Talk about your masochism, right?
Right.
So,
nice.
And I never did that. I said, well, you go for it. I'm going to stick with my VB. But they also contracted out to a bunch of other programmers to do masked edit controls, and we hooked up with Steve Cramp and got a 256 color control, when the picture control only did 16 colors. We started buying up and hiring contractors to do all these controls. So we had a library. We were the second on the market. MicroHelp was the first. They were just by a couple of weeks too. They weren't maybe a couple of months, but it wasn't very long time in between the two. MicroHelp, of course, went on to do Uninstaller, that program.
Oh, sure.
And then they imploded. I guess they
would track when you installed an app so that you could get it back off again.
Yeah, they had the first uninstaller technology.
Wow.
Yep. Made a fortune with that. And then they gave the CEO gave it all to some funky religion or something, and they went bankrupt.
I think that's the real path to money. We should form a funky religion.
There you go. Yes.
We just have to find someone to worship.
I think we should worship a common ancestor to VB and C#. We should find we should have
You mean ones and zeros in a row? We should...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Some way that VB programmers and C# programmers can lay down their guns and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. What do you think?
Around the campfire roasting marshmallows. Yeah, I like it. Totally. I don't know if there's any money in that, but I'm into it.
I'd say something right now, but you guys are kind of creeping me out with the weird code religion talk here.
I actually used religion in my ASP.NET Masterclass this week. I was talking
about solving debates. It was easier to solve Judaism versus Christianity than it was, Emacs versus VI.
No, well, I will tell you, actually. It was, I was talking about how the web is a stateless being, and, a lot of these programmers who were Windows programmers who hadn't done web programming before. And so, the idea that your class level variables just go away. Oh my God. So, I told him that it was, at every request, it came into being and then went out of being. It became, and it did, and it was becoming, and then it went away. Kind of like Vishnu sitting on the lotus flower.
That is very Zen. Yes,
opening his eyes, and a universe comes into being, and he closes his eyes, and a whole universe goes out of existence.
Did you say that?
Yeah.
Wow.
And did they get it?
You know
was
what?
it like blank stares? Or
No, yeah, it was worse than that. They were yawning and looking around for coffee.
No, because I'd enjoy that, but I can imagine that, getting up there and being in a VB class and hearing this thing about Vishnu, they might be a little confused at first, but I think that it adds some color to the whole thing. But
well, it does if you know what the hell that is.
Yeah, I don't, but I like it anyway.
So that brings up an interesting topic. So you started the training thing how many years ago?
Oh, yeah. So the first class I did was for Crescent long ago. After I moved to California and back, I...
No. I'm asking how many years ago was it?
Yeah, probably 92, 93.
So just to translate that, the answer to my question is about 10 or 11, Chris.
Yes, and that was the question you asked me like 15 minutes ago.
Right, exactly.
I'm so
How
sorry.
many years ago? Okay, so now we know. You've been doing the training thing for about 10 or 11 years.
Yeah, but not seriously. I really started seriously with Franklin's Net in 1999.
Okay. So about 4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that time, as I did the instructor thing for about 8 years, and
right, with
the
DM
speaker thing, and I did it a long time, and I know that sometimes you just get into this special place where you're connecting to some part of your brain that isn't even attached to your body.
Kind of like Rory.
Right, all the time. Yes, exactly. And you just start telling these stories, and
yes.
I was just curious what's the strangest story you've ever found yourself telling?
I refrain from strange stories.
Because I find they're wonderful, both in terms of waking the audience up and keeping them on their toes, because they don't have any idea when I'm going to freak out and pull out an automatic weapon. And also because I find these wacky stories are often very good analogies that can help them connect to the technology. Sometimes,
I suppose. In general, I try to refrain from stories because if I was sitting in a class and I wanted to know, how to make a type data set work across a web service, I don't want to be sitting there listening to some story. And then I invented the internet and, blah, 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 blah,
No, I'm not talking about, making shit up. I'm talking about, analogies. Like, for example, Don...
Oh, okay.
Don on his blog the other day was talking about, the Roach Motel and how Winifest was killing the Roach Motel. And it was immediately obvious that he was talking about today that applications, the data comes in, but it doesn't come out. And, that was the Roach Motel, and Winifest was all about letting those roaches roam free.
That's cool. Actually, I have certain things that I say the same every single time, and when I look back on the volume that I've remembered and recited, I could write it down, and it would go on and on and on. It's
so
pretty
you've
amazing.
Done that, right?
It's kind of like
if you can write a whole book on socket programming for Visual Basic 4, you could make a book out of anything.
Probably right.
How much is there? Could you even do socket programming in Visual Basic 4? Maybe that was why it was such a long book.
Yeah, the thing about those books were that it concentrated, it was one book about the fundamentals, and then it concentrated on how to write protocols. So we were writing FTP, SMTP, NNTP.
And you did all of the protocols from scratch?
Client side. How to download your email. How to send an email. How to send a file via FTP.
Now we just call SMTP mail.send.
Yeah, and we just go to Google and find a free FTP control that's been written in C# by some guy with no life and plug it in.
I argue that's better.
It's better. It's much better.
Yeah, it's very
much
cool.
better.
In fact, it's rare that I can even, except for in the Longhorn side, right? Because, that's so brand new. But in .NET even, in the last year plus, it's rare that you can really come up with a question that hasn't been answered.
It's true.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Which I like. Well, so Carl, we're almost to the end of our time. What else would you like to say to the audience? We've covered a large range of topics.
Well, I didn't know what to expect from this show, and I really, really enjoyed it. it's enjoyable being a guest on .NET Rocks.
Oh, totally. I love being a guest. Rory, you've been a guest.
I've been a guest.
And?
It's very satisfying.
Yes, I like it very much.
I was a little nervous the first time, and I drank a lot afterwards. I should have drank before. I didn't. That's my only recommendation. This time, second time, feeling much better. I think it's great.
Yeah, but the beauty is, the wonderful thing about being interviewed in any way, I've been interviewed for magazines and little spots and the .NET Rock show.
Oh, Mr. Important.
Yeah. But it's always fun to have someone just actually pay attention to you, because at my house, no one really cares, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
Because, my job consists of sitting very still for 8 hours and looking at a tiny little screen without moving or sound.
Very true.
So, the fact that somebody would actually care about that is really nice. So, yeah, it's totally wonderful.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed being a guest on my show.
Well, you've done an excellent job as a guest.
And might I say, you have done an excellent job as a host. Hasn't he done an excellent job, ladies and gentlemen? Just give Chris a little round of applause. and Rory, too. Rory, you're natural. You're a natural.
Oh, thank you.
And he's full of color, isn't he?
He's perfect.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, maybe will be your second show on the new Carl Franklin Most Spectacular .NET Radio Network.
Yeah, and send me those suggestions for names and any other suggestions you want. I'm all ears.
Oh, it's totally got to be Nerd World. If that URL's available, I'm going to own it and squat on it until you give me a lot of money.
Okay.
Well, anyway, thank you very much, Carl. Next week, stay tuned for what? Rory, what are we doing next week?
I was going to go home.
I think it's a success.
Burrito. I don't know.
I think it's a success story. Hang on, I'll tell you in a minute.
How about those failure stories? We want to hear about those dang failure stories.
Actually, that's the other show. The other show will do
cool.
failure stories.
We tried this technology, and it sucks. We're never doing it again.
Okay, next show is going to be the .NET Success Stories number 2. The guests are going to be Jesse Ezel and Chris Kinsman.
Oh, cool.
Sweet.
And there you go.
They're going to talk about their successes with .NET in the real world, projects they've actually been paid for that have succeeded.
Well, so the cool thing about Chris Kinsman is, in addition to him being very smart, he's done a ton of work on the no-touch deployment stuff with WinForms.
Yeah.
And just melding that together with websites and kind of transitioning back and forth between, we need this client to work everywhere, or, this is a smart client for Windows, and, man, that guy just knows a ton.
Yep, he certainly does.
Really cool. So, anyway, thanks very much for letting us pepper you with questions, Carl.
You're welcome.
And we'll be listening next week. Rory, any final words? Well said. Yes, you can tell he's really good at radio. Thank you very much.
I enjoyed this much.
Have another drink, pal.
All right.
Good night.
Bye, guys.